The smell of antiseptic burned my nostrils as I scrubbed my hands raw in the hospital's staff bathroom. 3 double shifts in a row had left dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Outside, the autumn rain pelted against the windows, matching the steady drip of the leaky faucet beside me. "Olivia, they need you in Trauma 3. I nodded mechanically at my coworker, my reflection in the mirror a ghost of the woman who'd once had dreams beyond these sterile walls. 26 years old, and already I felt weathered by life's storms. "Coming," I called back, though my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. I straightened my scrubs and pushed through the door, the fluorescent lights overhead humming like angry wasps. The emergency department buzzed with its usual chaotic energy. Nurses rushing between rooms, the occasional beeping of monitors, and the underlying current of pain and worry that pervaded every hospital. I never saw them arrive. One moment the hallway was clear, and the next, it was filled with dark suits and tension so thick it felt like walking through fog. They moved like a single organism, parting only to reveal their center, a man whose presence seemed to bend the very air around him. He wasn't particularly tall, but something about him commanded attention. His suit was immaculate, the fabric clearly expensive in a way my second-hand clothes could never be. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from stone, revealing eyes that surveyed the room with calculating precision. My step faltered as those eyes landed on me, cold, assessing, dangerous. "Are you in charge?" His voice cut through the hospital noise, accented slightly in a way that made each word seem deliberate. No, we need a private room, now." He didn't raise his voice, but the command in it made several staff members nearby freeze. That's when I noticed the blood. Not on him, but on the man being supported between 2 of his associates. A younger man, pale and struggling to stay conscious, with a rapidly spreading crimson stain across his abdomen. "Gunshot," I said automatically, my training kicking in despite the intimidation radiating from the group. "He needs to be in Trauma 3, not a private room, and we need to report." The cold-eyed man stepped closer to me, and every instinct screamed to back away. I didn't. 7 years of nursing had taught me to stand my ground, even when terrified. "There will be no reports," he said softly, each word precise as a scalpel. "You will treat him, privately. Your discretion will be compensated." I should have called security, should have alerted the police. Instead, I found myself leading them to an isolated examination room that had been prepped for minor procedures, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I need supplies," I managed to say, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. He nodded once, and I slipped out, gathering everything I could think of to treat a gunshot wound. When I returned, 2 of the suits stood guard outside. Inside, the injured man lay on the table, the leader watching from a corner, shadows playing across his face. The wound was clean, a through and through that had missed vital organs by millimeters. As I worked to stabilize the patient, I could feel those eyes on me, tracking every movement of my hands. "You're good at this," he observed after several minutes of silence. "It's my job." "No," he replied. "Your job is following protocols. This is something else." I didn't respond, focusing instead on finishing the sutures. When I was done, I stepped back, stripping off my gloves. "He needs antibiotics and monitoring. This is temporary at best." The man nodded, pulling out a phone. He spoke rapidly in what sounded like Italian, his voice low and controlled. When he finished, he turned back to me. "What's your name?" Every warning bell in my mind rang simultaneously. "Olivia," I answered, offering no surname. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Alessandro Ricci," he said, offering his own name as if we were meeting at a cocktail party instead of over a gunshot victim in a compromised hospital room. I knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. The Ricci family controlled half the city's underworld, their legitimate businesses merely a veneer over more violent enterprises, and I'd just helped them circumvent the law requiring all gunshot wounds to be reported. "I need to go," I said, backing toward the door. "My shift is over," Alessandro interrupted smoothly. "I've arranged it." Fear crawled up my spine. "What does that mean?" It means you're coming with us, temporarily. He stepped closer, and I could smell expensive cologne mingling with something darker. My associate requires medical attention for the next 48 hours. You will provide it. I can't just leave. I had what? An empty apartment? A cat who was used to my absence? No family waiting for my return? Responsibilities. Alessandro reached into his jacket, and I flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he withdrew a thick envelope. This should address any inconveniences. He placed it on the medical tray beside me. Consider it a private nursing assignment, very well compensated. I didn't touch the envelope, and if I refuse, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I would strongly advise against that. The threat hung between us, unspoken, but clear as glass. I thought of my crushing student debt, the eviction notice taped to my apartment door, my mother's assisted living facility threatening to discharge her for non-payment. I thought of what this man could do if I said no. 48 hours, I said finally. Then I walk away, and you never contact me again. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I never should have believed him. They took me to a penthouse apartment in a building I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. The kind of luxury high-rise where the lobby looked like a museum, and the elevator required a special key. The injured man, Marco, Alessandro's cousin, I learned, was installed in a bedroom that could have swallowed my entire apartment. I worked through the night, monitoring vitals, changing bandages, administering antibiotics that had appeared from some private pharmacy. Alessandro watched from the corner, making occasional phone calls in Italian, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, yet somehow carrying an undercurrent of menace that made the recipients on the other end respond immediately. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I hadn't slept in over 30 hours, and the adrenaline that had kept me upright was fading fast. You need rest, Alessandro observed, appearing beside me as I checked Marco's temperature. I shook my head. I'm fine. You're swaying on your feet. His hand caught my elbow, steadying me. The touch was unexpected. Warm, firm, almost gentle. I jerked away as if burned. Don't touch me. Something flickered across his face, annoyance, perhaps, at being denied anything. There's a guest room. Sleep. My men will watch Marco. Your men aren't nurses. They know enough to call if his condition changes. Sleep now or you'll be useless later. The logic was sound, even if his tone made me bristle. I followed him to another bedroom. This one decorated in shades of blue and silver, with a bed that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. 2 hours, I said firmly. Then wake me. Alessandro's mouth curved into that not-quite smile, as you wish. When I woke, the room was bathed in afternoon light. I'd slept not for 2 hours but for 8, my body surrendering to exhaustion despite my intentions. Panicked, I rushed to check on Marco, only to find him awake and talking quietly with Alessandro. Both men looked up as I entered. Marco smiled weakly, but Alessandro's expression remained unreadable. You should have woken me, I accused. You needed the rest, Alessandro replied simply. Marco is stable. I checked for myself, finding the fever reduced and the wound showing no signs of infection. Relief mingled with irritation at having my instructions ignored. I'm starving, I admitted, suddenly aware of the hollowness in my stomach. The kitchen is fully stocked, Alessandro gestured toward a doorway. Help yourself. I found myself in a kitchen larger than my entire apartment, gleaming with stainless steel and marble. Opening the refrigerator revealed an array of fresh food that made my usual diet of ramen and coffee seem even more pathetic. As I assembled a sandwich, I heard footsteps behind me. Alessandro leaned against the doorframe, watching me with that same intense scrutiny. You live alone, he stated rather than asked. I froze, knife hovering over the bread. How would you know that? I know many things about you, Olivia Sinclair. The use of my full name sent a chill through me. You had me investigated, he shrugged, the gesture elegant even in its dismissiveness. It's prudent to know who one is dealing with. And what exactly did your investigation tell you? I asked, anger overriding caution. 26 years old, Graduated with honors from nursing school despite working 2 jobs. Mother in assisted living with early onset Alzheimer's. Father unknown. Student loans in default. Rent 3 months overdue. He recited the details of my life as if reading a shopping list. Excellent performance reviews at work, though your supervisor notes you're too independent for your own good. Each word felt like an invasion. He'd stripped away my privacy as easily as peeling an orange, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. What gives you the right? My voice trembled with fury. Rights have nothing to do with it. He stepped into the kitchen, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Information is survival. I backed away until the counter pressed against my spine. The 48 hours are ticking, Mr. Ricci. Once they're done, what I do or who I am is none of your concern. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. We'll see. The words sent a shiver of foreboding through me. A premonition that this man had no intention of letting me simply walk away when our agreement ended. I'd made a terrible mistake stepping into his world, even temporarily, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and anger, lurked something even more terrifying. A treacherous fascination with a dark intensity that surrounded Alessandro Ricci like a second skin. As evening fell, the penthouse filled with Alessandro's associates, men in expensive suits who spoke in hushed tones and cast curious glances my way. I retreated to Marco's room, using my patient as a shield against their scrutiny. He won't hurt you, you know, Marco said suddenly as I checked his bandages. I looked up, startled. What? Alessandro. He seems intimidating, but he values loyalty above all else. Marco's eyes, so similar to his cousin's, watched me carefully. You helped us. That means something to him. I was coerced, I pointed out. Marco's smile was weak but genuine. Yet you did an excellent job anyway. Professional integrity. He respects that. I said nothing, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I didn't want Alessandro Ricci's respect or understanding. I wanted to complete our arrangement and escape back to my ordinary life. A life that now seemed unbearably gray and empty compared to the dangerous vibrancy of the world I'd stumbled into. As I turned to leave, Marco caught my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for someone recovering from blood loss. Be careful, he whispered. Not of Alessandro, of yourself. Some people find our world addictive. I pulled away, unnerved by how accurately he'd read my conflicted thoughts. I'm not some thrill-seeker looking for excitement. No, he agreed. You're something much more dangerous. You're honest in a world of lies. That makes you either very valuable or very vulnerable. Before I could respond, the door opened, and Alessandro entered, his gaze flickering between us with sharp assessment. The doctor is here, he announced. Your services may soon be concluding, Ms. Sinclair. The way he said it, like a threat rather than a relief, made my stomach clench with apprehension. As I stepped past him toward the door, his hand caught mine, fingers wrapping around my wrist in a touch that was neither gentle nor harsh, simply possessive. Unless, he added softly, his breath warm against my ear, we find another arrangement that benefits us both. The words hung between us, loaded with implication. I jerked away and hurried from the room, heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird seeking escape. But even as I fled, I couldn't ignore the electric current that had shot through me at his touch, or the treacherous voice whispering that part of me didn't want to leave at all. The doctor who arrived was nothing like I expected. Dr. Elena Russo was a poised woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the confident air of someone who'd seen everything life could throw at her. She examined Marco with professional efficiency, nodded approvingly at my work, and then turned those shrewd eyes on me. You've done well, she said. Better than most would under the circumstances. I felt Alessandro's gaze on us, heavy as a physical weight. Thank you, I replied simply. Dr. A. Russo gathered her equipment, speaking to Alessandro in rapid Italian. Though I couldn't understand the words, her tone was familiar, almost chiding. To my surprise, he responded not with the cold authority he showed everyone else, but with something approaching respect. When she left, Alessandro turned to me. The doctor confirms Marco is stable. Your obligation is nearly fulfilled." Relief should have washed over me. Instead, I felt something closer to disappointment, immediately followed by self-disgust at the reaction. What was wrong with me? "I'd like to stay until morning," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "For medical reasons. To ensure there are no complications." His eyebrow arched slightly. "As you wish." That night I couldn't sleep. The guest room that had previously seemed like a sanctuary now felt like a prison, albeit a luxurious one. I paced the length of it, my thoughts a tangled mess. Tomorrow I would return to my apartment with its leaking ceiling and past due notices, to shifts that stretched beyond exhaustion, to my mother who no longer recognized me. And I would never see Alessandro Ricci again. The thought shouldn't have bothered me. The man was dangerous, not just because of what he did, but because of how he made me feel, like I was constantly standing on the edge of a precipice, simultaneously terrified of falling and curious about the descent. Unable to remain still, I slipped out of the room. The penthouse was quiet, most of Alessandro's men gone. I padded to the kitchen for a glass of water, only to freeze at the sight of a figure silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alessandro stood with his back to me, looking out over the city. He'd shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. A glass of amber liquid dangled from his fingers, and something about his posture spoke of solitude so profound it made my chest ache. I should have retreated. Instead, I stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath my foot. He didn't turn. "Can't sleep, Ms. Sinclair? It's Olivia," I said, moving to stand beside him. The Chicago skyline stretched before us, a constellation of lights against the darkness. "And no, I can't." "Regrets?" I glanced at him. His profile was sharp against the night, all angles and shadows. "About helping Marco? No. About entering my world, then." It wasn't a question. I considered lying, then decided against it. Something about the darkness and the isolation made honesty feel safer. "I don't know what I feel." He took a sip of his drink. "Fear would be appropriate. I'm not afraid of you." Now he did turn, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "Then you're a fool." "Probably," I admitted. "But fear isn't what keeps me awake." His gaze intensified. "What does?" I looked away, back to the skyline. The knowledge that tomorrow I return to a life that suddenly feels insufficient. Alessandro was silent for so long, I thought he wouldn't respond. Then he moved, setting his glass down on a nearby table with deliberate precision. "What if you didn't?" My heart stuttered. "Didn't what?" "Return." He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne again, spice and darkness. "What if I offered you a position, personal medical consultant to my family? Exclusive contract, extremely well compensated." I should have refused immediately. Instead, I asked, "Why would you want that? You're skilled, discreet, unattached." His eyes traced my face as if memorizing its contours. "And you've seen what we are, yet you stand here unafraid. I told you it's not fear that—" "I know what it is," he interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "It's recognition. You've spent your life caring for everyone else, drowning in responsibility with no reward. You're tired of being invisible, of being good and getting nothing in return." His words sliced through my defenses with surgical precision. How could he see so clearly what I'd barely admitted to myself? "I'm offering you a way out, Olivia. All you have to do is take it." I swallowed hard. "And what would this position entail exactly?" "You would live here, in the guest quarters, be available when needed for medical situations. In return, you'd have financial security, protection, and—" He gestured to the opulent space around us. "Certain comforts. A gilded cage is still a cage," I said softly. His mouth curved. Is freedom and poverty really freedom at all? The question hung between us, unanswerable. I thought of my mother's care facility threatening to discharge her, of my own apartment with its eviction notice, of the crushing weight of debt that kept me working until I could barely stand. "I need time to think," I managed. "Of course, but don't take too long." He stepped closer, his presence enveloping me like a shadow. "I rarely make offers twice." I retreated to my room, sleep more elusive than ever. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but my mind remained clear. I found Alessandro in his study, surrounded by papers and a laptop, looking every inch the legitimate businessman he pretended to be. He glanced up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Have you decided?" "Yes." I took a deep breath. "I'll accept your offer, but with conditions." Interest flickered across his face. "You're in no position to negotiate." "I'm in exactly the position to negotiate," I countered. "You want something from me. That gives me leverage." A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from him, briefly transformed his face. "Very well. Your conditions?" "My mother's care is guaranteed, regardless of what happens between us. I maintain my nursing license and take shifts at the hospital twice a week to keep my skills current. I want everything in writing, a legitimate contract, and I maintain my own residence, even if I stay here most of the time." Alessandro considered me, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Your mother's care, yes. The hospital shifts, no. Too public, too unpredictable. Your license can be maintained through continuing education. The contract, yes. Your own residence." He paused. "Unnecessary. But if it provides you with the illusion of independence, I'll allow it." I bristled at his phrasing. "Allow it?" "Poor choice of words," he conceded smoothly. "I'll agree to it." We stared at each other across the desk, the tension between us humming like a live wire. I should have felt victorious. I'd secured most of what I wanted. Instead, I felt as though I'd stepped into quicksand, sinking deeper with each movement. "When do I start?" I asked finally. "You already have." He pushed a folder across the desk. "Your contract. Review it. My lawyer will answer any questions." The contract was meticulous, outlining duties that seemed reasonable, compensation that made my eyes widen, and clauses protecting both parties. I signed it that afternoon, the scratch of pen on paper sealing my fate. 3 weeks later, I'd settled into a routine. Marco had recovered fully and returned to his own residence. I'd moved most of my belongings into the guest quarters of Alessandro's penthouse, though I maintained my apartment as agreed. My mother had been transferred to a premium care facility, where she had her own suite and personalized attention. And Alessandro remained an enigma, present yet distant, our interactions formal despite our living arrangement. He was rarely home, his business taking him away at odd hours. When he was there, he treated me with detached courtesy that bordered on coldness, until the night, everything changed. I was reading in the living room when the elevator opened. Alessandro stumbled in, one arm clutched across his midsection, blood seeping between his fingers. "Cristo," he muttered, collapsing onto a chair. I was beside him instantly, nurse mode activated. "What happened?" "Business disagreement," he grunted as I pried his hand away to examine the wound. A deep slash across his ribs, bleeding profusely but not arterial. "You need stitches," I said, already moving to gather my supplies. He caught my wrist, his grip firm despite his injury. "No hospitals." "Of course not," I replied, somewhat offended. "I can do it here." The relief in his eyes was momentary but unmistakable. I worked quickly, cleaning the wound and preparing to suture. As I began, I noticed the tension in his jaw, the only sign that he felt pain. "You can make noise, you know," I said, placing another stitch. "I won't think less of you. Pain is irrelevant," he replied, his voice strained. "Control is everything." I shook my head. "That sounds exhausting." "It's necessary. In my position, yes, I know. You're the big bad wolf, always in control, always feared." I tied off another stitch. "Doesn't it get lonely?" His eyes, dark with pain, fixed on my face. "Loneliness is also irrelevant." "Nothing human is irrelevant," I countered, finishing the final stitch. As I placed a bandage over my handiwork, my fingers lingered on his skin, warm despite his pallor. Something shifted in his expression. "You're unusual, Olivia Sinclair." "Because I don't fear you, because you see me." The simple statement held such vulnerability that my heart contracted painfully. Before I could respond, he stood, swaying slightly. "You should rest," I said, medical concern overriding the sudden emotional tension. That wound needs time to heal. I have meetings. That can wait, I interrupted firmly. Doctor's orders. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Are you a doctor now? In this penthouse, my word on medical matters is law. You agreed to that. I took his arm, guiding him toward his bedroom. Now, stop being difficult. To my surprise, he allowed me to lead him, his usual iron control softened by blood loss and perhaps something else, something I was afraid to name. His bedroom was masculine and minimalist, all dark wood and charcoal gray. I helped him sit on the edge of the bed, then hesitated. Do you need assistance? I gestured vaguely to his blood-stained shirt. Alessandro's mouth curved. Are you offering to undress me, Olivia? Heat rushed to my face. I'm offering medical assistance. Of course. He began unbuttoning his shirt with one hand, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. I sighed. Let me. My fingers worked the buttons, carefully pulling the fabric away from the wound. As I helped him out of the shirt, I couldn't help noticing the rest of him. The lean muscle beneath olive skin, the scars that told stories of violence survived, the tattoo over his heart, a lion surrounded by Italian words I couldn't read. Family motto, he said, catching my gaze. Strength protects its own. Is that what you were doing tonight? Protecting your own? His eyes darkened. Always. I helped him lie back against the pillows, arranging them to keep pressure off his injured side. As I turned to leave, his hand caught mine. Stay, he said softly. Just until I fall asleep. The request was so unlike him, vulnerable, almost childlike, that I couldn't refuse. I sat beside him on the bed, our hands still connected. Tell me something, he murmured, his voice growing heavy with approaching sleep. Something no one else knows about you. I hesitated, then decided honesty was a fair exchange for the vulnerability he'd shown me. I hate being a nurse. His eyes opened slightly. Yet you're excellent at it. Being good at something doesn't mean you love it. I shrugged. I became a nurse because it was practical. Steady employment, decent pay. My mother needed care, and I needed stability. What would you have chosen if stability wasn't a concern? The question made my throat tighten. No one had ever asked me that before. Art, I admitted finally. I wanted to study art history, maybe restoration. I love the idea of preserving beautiful things, bringing them back to life. His fingers tightened around mine. You're doing that now, with people, instead of paintings. The observation was so unexpected, so insightful, that it left me momentarily speechless. I never thought of it that way. Perhaps you should. His eyes drifted closed, his breathing deepening. I sat with him until he fell asleep, watching the harsh lines of his face soften in repose. In sleep, Alessandro Ricci looked almost peaceful. The dangerous edge temporarily dulled. I found myself wondering what he might have been in another life, one without the violence and power that defined him now. As I carefully extracted my hand from his, he stirred, murmuring something in Italian. I leaned closer, trying to catch the words. Non lasciarmi, he whispered. Don't leave me. The raw need in those unconscious words cracked something in my chest. I told myself it was the pain medication I'd given him, nothing more. That in the morning, he would be himself again, controlled, distant, dangerous. But as I slipped from his room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd glimpsed something real beneath the armor. Something lonely and human that called to the lonely human part of me. And that, I knew, was far more dangerous than any physical threat he might pose. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices from the kitchen. Wrapping myself in a robe, I ventured out to find Alessandro fully dressed in another immaculate suit, speaking rapidly in Italian to two men I recognized as his lieutenants. He showed no sign of the previous night's injury beyond a slight stiffness in his movements. When he saw me, he broke off mid-sentence. Olivia. The way he said my name, formal again, all traces of vulnerability erased, told me exactly where we stood. Last night had been an aberration, a moment of weakness he now regretted. "I need to check your wound," I said, keeping my tone professionally detached. "Later." He dismissed me with a wave, turning back to his men. Anger flared, hot and unexpected. I stepped directly into his line of sight. "Now," I insisted, "or I'll assume you're being deliberately difficult and take appropriate measures." His men froze, clearly unaccustomed to anyone challenging Alessandro. A dangerous silence fell, heavy with unspoken threats. Then, incredibly, Alessandro laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle him as much as everyone else. "Gentlemen, give us a moment." When they had withdrawn, he turned to me, amusement lingering in his eyes. "Appropriate measures? I would have thought of something," I replied, refusing to back down. "I'm sure you would have." He began unbuttoning his shirt. "Well, doctor, examine your patient." I approached cautiously, the intimacy of the previous night hanging between us like an unspoken question. The bandage was clean, no signs of bleeding. When I peeled it back, the stitches looked good, no redness, no swelling. "Satisfied?" he asked as I replaced the bandage. "For now." I stepped back, suddenly aware of our proximity. "But you should be resting, not conducting business. Rest is a luxury I can't afford." "Everyone needs rest, Alessandro, even you." His eyes narrowed at my familiar use of his name. "Be careful, Olivia." "Of what? Treating you like a person instead of a myth?" His hand shot out, gripping my chin with fingers that trembled slightly. "You think you know me because you've seen me bleed? Because I showed a moment of weakness?" I didn't flinch. "I think I know there's more to you than you want anyone to see." "There isn't." His grip tightened. Not enough to hurt, but enough to emphasize his control. "Whatever you think you saw last night, forget it. In this world, my world, sentiment is a liability. Attachment is a weapon to be used against you." "Then why did you ask me to stay?" I challenged. The question hit its mark. Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or frustration at being caught in his own contradiction. A momentary lapse. He released me, stepping back. "One that won't be repeated." "Of course not," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Heaven forbid the great Alessandro Ricci should need anyone. I turned to leave, but his words stopped me at the door. "Olivia." His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "What I need is irrelevant. What matters is maintaining order, protecting what's mine. Personal desires have no place in that equation." I looked back at him, standing alone in the kitchen, perfectly composed, yet somehow more isolated than ever. "That sounds like a prison of your own making," I said softly. His smile was bitter. "Better to build the prison yourself than have others build it for you." As I walked away, I wondered which of us was truly caged. Him in his self-imposed isolation, or me in my growing fascination with a man who insisted on remaining unreachable. In the weeks that followed, Alessandro maintained his distance, our interactions limited to brief exchanges about household matters or medical checkups for his wound. He was frequently absent, returning late at night with the scent of expensive whiskey clinging to him, or not returning at all. I filled my days managing his household medical supplies, reading medical journals to maintain my credentials, and exploring the penthouse's impressive library. Sometimes I visited my mother, though these trips were always accompanied by one of Alessandro's men. For my protection, he claimed, though it felt more like surveillance. My mother no longer recognized me, her mind lost in the fog of early-onset Alzheimer's. She smiled politely when I held her hand, thanked me for the flowers I brought, and asked when her daughter would visit. Each time, I explained that I was her daughter, watched confusion cloud her eyes, then acceptance, then the inevitable forgetting moments later. "She seems comfortable," remarked Dominic, the guard who most frequently accompanied me as we left the facility one rainy afternoon. "She is," I admitted. "The care here is exceptional." What remained unspoken was the reason for that care. Alessandro's money, Alessandro's influence, another golden chain binding me to him. "You're quiet today," Dominic observed as we drove back to the penthouse. I stared out at the rain-slicked streets. "Just tired." "The boss is returning tonight," he offered, as if this might cheer me. "Been in New York for 3 days." I hadn't known that. Alessandro never shared his schedule with me, never explained his absences. I was simply expected to be available when needed, invisible when not. Wonderful, I said flatly. Dominic glanced at me in the rearview mirror. He asks about you, you know, when he's away. This caught my attention. What do you mean? Calls to check that you're safe, wants to know if you've been eating, sleeping. Dominic shrugged. Never seen him do that before. For anyone who wasn't family, I absorbed this information silently, unsure what to make of it. If Alessandro was concerned about my welfare, why the cold distance, the deliberate avoidance? When we arrived at the penthouse, I retreated to my quarters, a suite of rooms that, while luxurious, remained distinctly separate from Alessandro's living space. I soaked in a bath, trying to wash away the lingering sadness from visiting my mother, then dressed in comfortable leggings and an oversized sweater. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke as night fell, lightning flashing across the sky in brilliant streaks. I curled up on the window seat in my bedroom, watching the tempest, a glass of wine in hand. I didn't hear him enter. One moment I was alone, the next his reflection appeared in the glass beside mine. "You didn't wait up," Alessandro said, his voice neutral. I turned, taking in his appearance, still in a business suit, though his tie was loosened, hair slightly damp from the rain. "I didn't know when you'd return. Dominic said you visited your mother today." So he had been checking on me. Yes. How is she? The unexpected inquiry made my throat tighten. The same. She doesn't remember me. Alessandro moved closer, his expression softening fractionally. That must be difficult. It is what it is. I took a sip of wine, uncomfortable with his sudden interest. How was New York? Profitable. He loosened his tie further, then removed it completely, draping it over the back of a chair. The casual gesture felt oddly intimate. May I? He gestured to the space beside me on the window seat. I nodded, drawing my knees closer to make room. He sat, his weight causing the cushion to dip, sliding me slightly toward him until our shoulders nearly touched. "Do you resent me, Olivia?" he asked after a long silence. The question startled me. For what? This arrangement. The constraints it places on your life. I considered the question honestly, sometimes. But then I remember my mother's care, my freedom from financial worry. The trade seems fair. Is that all it is to you? A transaction? His eyes, dark and unreadable, studied me with uncomfortable intensity. Something in his tone suggested the answer mattered more than it should. "I don't know what else it could be," I said carefully. "You've made it clear that personal attachments are a liability in your world." The words hung between us, echoing his own statement from weeks before. Lightning flashed, illuminating the harsh planes of his face, the tension in his jaw. Perhaps I was hasty in that assessment. My heart stuttered. Meaning? Instead of answering, he reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. "You look tired, Olivia. Visiting my mother is emotionally draining," I admitted. "Watching someone you love forget you piece by piece, it hollows you out. You continue to go, despite the pain it causes you. Of course, she's my mother." "Loyalty," he murmured, almost to himself, "regardless of personal cost. A rare quality." I shook my head. "It's not loyalty, it's love." Are they not the same? The question revealed so much about his worldview that it made my heart ache. "No, Alessandro, they're not the same at all." His hand, still near my face, traced the line of my jaw with feather-light pressure. "Then perhaps you should educate me on the difference." The air between us thickened, charged with something I'd been trying to deny since that night I'd stitched his wound. I knew I should pull away, maintain the professional boundary that protected us both. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my eyes closing briefly. "Love isn't transactional," I said softly. "It persists even when there's nothing to gain, when there's everything to lose. It's not about advantage or alliance. It's about vulnerability. Vulnerability is dangerous," he replied, his voice dropping lower. "Yes," I agreed, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. "That's what makes it valuable." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows, but I barely noticed. Alessandro's face was closer now, his breath warm against my skin. "I have never allowed myself to be vulnerable," he confessed, the words barely audible. "Not since I was a child. Never?" His mouth curved in a bitter smile. "My father taught me early that weakness invited predators. In our world, to be vulnerable was to be prey, and yet here you are," I observed, "telling me this." Something shifted in his expression. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. Here I am. The moment stretched between us, fragile as spun glass. Then his phone rang, shattering the silence with its insistent buzz. Alessandro closed his eyes briefly, frustration evident in the tightening of his jaw. "I have to take this," he said, standing abruptly. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "Of course." He moved to the door, answered the phone with a curt greeting in Italian. Before leaving, he paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "This conversation isn't finished, Olivia." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the storm and the lingering warmth of his touch on my skin. The next morning, I woke to find the penthouse empty, save for the usual security detail stationed in the lobby. Alessandro had left before dawn, according to Dominic. Called away on urgent business, I tried not to feel disappointed. Whatever had transpired between us the previous night, whatever might have happened if not for that phone call, belonged to the darkness and the storm. In daylight, reality reasserted itself. He was Alessandro Ricci, head of one of Chicago's most powerful crime families, and I was essentially his employee. 3 days passed without his return. On the 4th morning, I was startled by the arrival of a courier bearing a large, flat package addressed to me. Inside was a painting, a small but exquisite Renaissance Madonna, her face serene as she gazed down at the child in her arms. Beneath the delicate gold frame was a note in elegant handwriting. "For the woman who wanted to preserve beautiful things. Now you have one of your own." My hands trembled as I hung the painting in my bedroom, emotions too complex to name swirling through me. It wasn't just the extravagance of the gift, though it was undoubtedly worth more than everything I'd ever owned combined. It was the thoughtfulness behind it. The proof that Alessandro had listened that night as I shared my abandoned dream, had remembered it weeks later. That evening, as I sat reading in the living room, the elevator doors opened to reveal Alessandro, accompanied by a striking woman in her early 30s. She was classically beautiful, with dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, and a red dress that clung to her curves. They were laughing about something as they entered, her hand resting familiarly on his arm. The sight sent an unexpected surge of jealousy through me, so sharp it left me breathless. Alessandro stopped short when he saw me, something like guilt flashing across his face before his expression smoothed into neutral courtesy. "Olivia," he said, his tone formal. "I didn't expect you to be up." I closed my book, forcing a smile. Clearly. The woman assessed me with cool interest. "And who is this?" she asked Alessandro in lightly accented English. "Olivia Sinclair, my personal medical consultant," he replied. "Olivia, this is Sofia Moretti, a business associate from Milan." Sofia's perfectly arched eyebrow lifted. "Medical consultant? How unusual." "Alessandro has diverse business interests," I said, my tone deliberately light despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Indeed he does." Her smile was knowing as she turned to him. "Alessandro, darling, I'm exhausted from the flight. Perhaps you could show me to my room?" He nodded, though his eyes remained on me. "Of course. This way." As they walked past, Sofia's hand slid possessively down his arm to link her fingers with his. The gesture was casual, but intimate, speaking of a familiarity that went beyond business. I retreated to my quarters, the joy I'd felt about the painting now tainted by doubt and confusion. What had I expected? That a man like Alessandro Ricci would be celibate? That our one moment of near connection meant something to him? I was a fool. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed restlessly, imagining Alessandro with Sofia. Their bodies entwined in the darkness. The images tortured me, all the more painful for being entirely of my own creation. A soft knock at my door startled me from my misery. I glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. "Olivia?" Alessandro's voice, quiet but insistent. "Are you awake?" I considered pretending to be asleep, but pride made me rise, wrapping my robe around myself before opening the door. He stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, though his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly disheveled. The scent of expensive whiskey clung to him, though his eyes were clear. "What do you want, Alessandro? May I come in?" I stepped back, allowing him to enter. He moved past me, his presence immediately filling the room, making it feel smaller. His gaze fell on the painting hanging on my wall, and something like satisfaction crossed his face. "You like it?" "It's beautiful," I admitted. "But you didn't have to. I wanted to." He turned to face me. "I've been thinking about what you said, about love versus loyalty. At 2:30 in the morning, with your business associate sleeping down the hall, I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice." "Sophia is exactly what I said she is, a business associate. Nothing more." "That's not what it looked like." Alessandro's mouth curved. "Are you jealous, Olivia? Don't flatter yourself." I wrapped my arms around my waist, suddenly feeling exposed despite the robe. "What happens between you and Sophia is none of my concern. Nothing happens between us." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Nothing has happened between us for years. We had an arrangement once, but it ended long ago." Relief flooded me, followed immediately by irritation at my own reaction. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't want there to be misunderstandings between us." Another step closer. "Because your opinion matters to me. Because," he broke off, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, and it's driving me mad." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and unexpected. My heart pounded in my chest, so loudly I was certain he must hear it. "Alessandro, don't," he interrupted. "Don't say anything yet. Just listen." He took a deep breath. "I've built my life around control. Over my business, my enemies, my own emotions. I've sacrificed personal connections for power and security. It was a choice I made willingly, one I never questioned." He moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. "Then you came into my life, with your unflinching honesty and your stubborn integrity, refusing to be intimidated. And suddenly, control seems insufficient." I remained silent, afraid that speaking might shatter this moment of unprecedented openness. "You asked once if I would hurt you," he continued. "The truth is, I already am. My world is dangerous, Olivia. The people in it, even more so. By keeping you at arm's length, I was trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection," I said softly. "I need your honesty." He turned back to me, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. "The honest truth? You're not just my medical consultant or my employee. You're the first person in years who sees me as a man, not a position or a threat, and it terrifies me." I moved toward him, drawn by the raw emotion in his voice. "Why?" "Because it gives you power over me." His hands came up to frame my face, his touch gentle despite the intensity of his words. "Because it makes me want things I can't have." "What things?" I whispered, my heart racing. "A normal life. A relationship uncomplicated by violence and obligation. You, without the shadow of my world darkening your light." His thumb traced my lower lip, sending shivers down my spine. "I should send you away," he murmured. "Release you from our contract. Let you find someone whose hands aren't stained with blood. Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." His eyes, dark with conflict, held mine. "What matters is what you deserve. Shouldn't that be my decision?" For a long moment, he simply looked at me, searching my face as if memorizing every detail. Then, with aching slowness, he leaned forward, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. His lips met mine in a kiss so gentle it barely qualified as a touch, a whisper of contact that nonetheless sent electricity coursing through me. I responded instinctively, my hands reaching up to curl around his shoulders, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, years of his self-denial and weeks of my confusion igniting into something desperate and consuming. His arms wrapped around me, one hand tangling in my hair, the other pressing against the small of my back until there was no space left between us. "Olivia," he breathed against my mouth, my name a prayer and a plea. I pulled back slightly, needing to see his face, to confirm this wasn't just another dream born of loneliness and wishful thinking. His eyes were dark, pupils dilated with desire. But there was something else there too, a vulnerability that made my chest ache. "If we do this," I said softly, "everything changes. It already has." His forehead rested against mine. "From the moment you stood your ground in that hospital corridor, nothing has been the same. I'm still your employee." "No." He shook his head. "You never were. The contract, the position, they were excuses to keep you close without admitting why I really wanted you here." "And why was that?" His smile was rueful. "Because you make me feel human. Because when you look at me, I want to be worthy of what you see." The confession, so simple yet profound, broke something open inside me. I kissed him again, pouring all my conflicted emotions into the contact, my frustration at his distance, my fear of the feelings growing between us, my undeniable attraction to this complex, dangerous man. He responded with equal fervor, his control finally slipping as he backed me toward the bed. We fell together onto the mattress, hands exploring, breaths mingling. His weight above me felt right somehow, protective rather than dominating. "Are you sure?" He whispered against my neck, his body tense with restraint. In answer, I pulled him closer, my fingers working the buttons of his shirt. "I've never been more sure of anything." What followed was unlike anything I'd experienced before, not just physically, though Alessandro's touch was both skilled and reverent, learning my body with the same intensity he brought to everything. It was the emotional intimacy that overwhelmed me, the way his eyes never left mine. The vulnerability he finally allowed himself to show. In the aftermath, we lay tangled together, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder, and I felt more at peace than I had in years. "You never answered my question," I murmured, sleep beginning to tug at the edges of my consciousness. "Which one?" "Why you've been avoiding me these past weeks." His hand stilled momentarily before resuming its gentle caress. "Fear," he admitted quietly. "Not of my enemies or my business rivals, but of this. Of wanting something so much that losing it would destroy me." I lifted my head to look at him. "Is that what you think would happen? That you'd lose me?" "My life doesn't allow for happy endings, Olivia." His expression was somber in the dim light. "The people I care about become targets. And even if they didn't, even if I could somehow keep you safe, there's the question of what I am, what I've done. I know what you are. Do you?" His eyes searched mine. "I've killed men, Olivia, ordered others killed. I've built my empire on violence and fear. The money that pays for your mother's care, that bought that painting you admire, it's blood money. I should have been repulsed. Instead, I found myself thinking of the man beneath the reputation, the one who checked that I was eating and sleeping when he was away, who remembered my abandoned dreams, who looked at me as if I were a miracle he didn't deserve. I see you," I said simply. "Not just what you've done, but who you are. The man who values loyalty and protection above all else, who carries the weight of every decision so others don't have to, who's been alone for so long he's forgotten there's another way to live." His arms tightened around me. "You romanticize me." "No. I humanize you. There's a difference." He was silent for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," I agreed, earning a surprised laugh from him. "But you have me anyway." As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, I drifted to sleep in Alessandro's arms, aware that I'd crossed a threshold from which there was no returning. Whatever came next, whatever complications or dangers his world might bring, I had made my choice. And for the first time in years, it felt like the right one. Morning light filtered through the curtains when I awoke, momentarily disoriented by the weight of an arm around my waist and the unfamiliar warmth of another body beside mine. The events of the previous night rushed back. Alessandro's confession, our passionate encounter, the vulnerability we'd both finally allowed ourselves to show. I turned carefully to find him still asleep, his features relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. Without the tension that usually hardened his expression, he looked younger, almost peaceful. A scar I hadn't noticed before curved along his collarbone, and I resisted the urge to trace it with my finger, not wanting to wake him yet. For several minutes, I simply watched him breathe, marveling at the turn my life had taken. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a struggling nurse with crushing debt and dwindling hope. Now I lay in luxury beside one of Chicago's most powerful men, a man who carried darkness in his soul, yet looked at me as if I were light itself. Eventually, Alessandro stirred, his eyes opening to meet mine. For a heartbeat, wariness flickered across his face, the instinctive vigilance of a man accustomed to danger. Then recognition dawned, followed by something softer. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Where else would I be? This is my bedroom." A smile tugged at his lips. Fair point. His hand found mine beneath the sheets, fingers intertwining with casual intimacy that belied the significance of the gesture. For a man who maintained rigid control in all aspects of his life, such a simple touch represented monumental change. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. "About last night? No. About where this might lead? I don't know yet." He nodded, appreciating my honesty. "That's fair. What about you?" His thumb traced circles on my palm. "My only regret is not doing this sooner." "You were protecting me, remember?" I teased gently, "keeping me at arm's length for my own good." "I was protecting myself," he corrected. "From this. From feeling human?" His eyes met mine, surprisingly vulnerable, dependent on another person's presence, on their good opinion, on their affection. The word hung between us, neither of us quite ready to name the stronger emotion building beneath the surface. "What happens now?" I asked, breaking the tension. Alessandro sighed, reluctantly withdrawing his hand as reality intruded. "Now I have a meeting with the heads of 3 families to negotiate territory boundaries. And you?" "Have my regular visit with my mother scheduled," I finished. He nodded, sitting up and running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We'll talk more tonight. There are implications to this change between us. Practical considerations, always the strategist, even in matters of the heart." I tried not to feel disappointed by his return to pragmatism. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light. "Practical considerations." Alessandro caught my chin gently, turning my face toward his. "Olivia, don't mistake caution for regret. What happened between us changes everything, and I need to ensure your safety now more than ever." The intensity in his eyes underscored the seriousness of his words. I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. He leaned forward, pressing a kiss to my forehead before rising from the bed. I watched as he gathered his clothes, admiring the lean strength of his body, the controlled grace of his movements. At the door, he paused. "Dominic will accompany you to see your mother. Stay with him at all times." The command was nothing new. I'd always had an escort for these visits, but there was a new urgency in his tone that gave me pause. "Is something wrong?" A shadow crossed his face. "Just a precaution." Before I could question him further, he was gone, leaving me alone with rumpled sheets and the lingering scent of his cologne. My visit to my mother that afternoon began like all the others. She greeted me politely, called me by the nurse's name, and listened with polite confusion as I updated her on my life, carefully edited to exclude any mention of Alessandro or his world. "You look different today, dear," she said suddenly, her head tilting as she studied my face. "Happy." The observation startled me. My mother rarely noticed details anymore, her mind too fractured to retain new information. "Do I?" She nodded sagely. "A man, is it? You have that look." For a moment she sounded so much like her old self, perceptive, gently teasing, that tears sprang to my eyes. "Yes," I admitted, "there is someone." "Is he kind to you?" The simple question gave me pause. Alessandro was many things, powerful, dangerous, intensely protective, but was he kind? I thought of the painting hanging in my room, of his concern for my well-being, of the gentleness in his touch despite the violence in his past. "In his way," I answered finally. "He's complicated." My mother's eyes, clouded by disease but momentarily lucid, held mine. The complicated ones always are. Just make sure he sees you, Isabella. Really sees you. The wrong name reminded me that this moment of clarity was fleeting. Still, her words resonated. Alessandro did see me, perhaps more clearly than anyone ever had. I'll remember that, I promised, squeezing her hand. When I left an hour later, Dominic was unusually tense, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings as he escorted me to the car. What's going on? I asked as he held the door open for me. Nothing to worry about, he replied automatically. Dominic. I fixed him with my most authoritative nurse's stare. I think we're past the point where you can feed me that line. He hesitated, then sighed. There's been some turbulence with the Vega family. The name was familiar from overheard conversations. The Vegas were rivals of the Ricci's, controlling territory on the west side of the city. What kind of turbulence? Dominic's jaw tightened as he slid behind the wheel. The kind that requires extra vigilance. We drove in silence for several blocks, the tension radiating from Dominic infecting me with growing unease. At a stoplight, I noticed him checking the rearview mirror more frequently than normal. Are we being followed? I asked quietly. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Maybe. Black SUV, 3 cars back. Been with us since we left the facility. Fear coiled in my stomach. What do we do? I'm going to try to lose them. If I can't... He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a gun and placing it in the center console. Last resort. The light changed, and Dominic accelerated, taking a sudden right turn that threw me against the door. The next few minutes blurred into a series of sharp turns and increased speed. Dominic's face set in grim concentration as he navigated Chicago's streets with practiced precision. I clutched the seat, heart pounding as we weaved through traffic. When Dominic finally relaxed slightly, I dared to breathe. Did we lose them? He nodded, though his vigilance didn't waver. For now, I'm taking an alternate route back. My phone rang, startling us both. Alessandro's name flashed on the screen. Are you safe? He demanded the moment I answered. Yes, we're fine. Dominic lost them. A string of Italian curses flowed through the speaker. I never should have let you leave today. Where are you now? I glanced at Dominic, who murmured our location. Go to the safe house on Ashland, Alessandro instructed. I'll meet you there. Do not return to the penthouse. Alessandro, what's happening? A brief silence then. Victor Vega's son was killed last night. They believe we were responsible. Were you? I asked before I could stop myself. No. His voice hardened. But they won't believe that until they've extracted their pound of flesh. The implications hit me with sickening clarity. And I'm an easy target. You're my weakness, he corrected, the admission clearly difficult for him. They've been watching, Olivia. They know what you mean to me. The words sent a complicated mix of emotions through me, fear at being a target, but also a warmth at his indirect acknowledgement of his feelings. I'll see you at the safe house, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stay with Dominic. Trust no one else. He paused. Olivia. I know, I replied softly, hearing the unspoken sentiment beneath his concern. I'll be careful. The safe house turned out to be a modest brownstone in an unremarkable neighborhood, its ordinary appearance belying the sophisticated security system Dominic disarmed upon our arrival. Inside, the furnishings were simple but comfortable, the windows bulletproof, the pantry well-stocked. I paced the living room while Dominic secured the perimeter, checking in periodically with Alessandro, who was tying up loose ends before joining us. The reality of my situation was finally sinking in. Being with Alessandro meant accepting not just the man, but the dangers that came with his position. Was I prepared for that? Could I live with the constant threat? The knowledge that I could be used against him by his enemies? More importantly, could I reconcile my feelings for him with what he did, with the violence and illegality that defined his world? I was still wrestling with these questions when the security system chimed, announcing Alessandro's arrival. He strode into the living room, tension radiating from every line of his body. His eyes swept over me, checking for injuries or signs of distress. Are you all right? He demanded. I'm fine, I assured him. A little shaken, but unharmed. Some of the rigidity left his posture, but the grim set of his mouth remained. I've spoken with Victor Vega, made it clear we had nothing to do with his son's death. Did he believe you? Not yet. But I've offered something that may convince him. What? Alessandro's expression darkened. Information on who was actually responsible. The Coletti family from Detroit has been trying to move into Chicago territory. They thought eliminating Andrea Vega and framing us would clear the path. How did you find this out? I have sources. His tone made it clear he wouldn't elaborate. I've scheduled a meeting with Victor tomorrow. Until then, you stay here, where it's safe. I nodded, accepting the necessity even as claustrophobia threatened. And after? What happens then, Alessandro? He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Best case? Vega accepts my evidence, redirects his vengeance toward the Colettis, and we establish a truce. And worst case? His eyes met mine, unflinching. War between our families, casualties on both sides, you, constantly at risk. The blunt assessment hit me like a physical blow. This was his reality, strategic thinking, calculating odds, weighing lives against power and territory. And us? I asked quietly. Where do we fit into these scenarios? Alessandro crossed to where I stood, his hands coming up to frame my face with surprising gentleness. That depends on you, Olivia. Last night changes nothing about who I am or what I do. If you want out, I'll understand. The offer was genuine. I could see it in his eyes. He would let me go if I asked, would ensure my safety and my mother's care regardless of my decision. It would cost him, perhaps more than he was willing to admit, but he would do it. Because he loved me. The realization struck with absolute clarity. Alessandro Ricci, who trusted no one, who had built walls around himself so high and thick they seemed impenetrable, had allowed himself to love me and was now prepared to lose me because of it. I'm not going anywhere, I said softly. Relief flashed across his face, quickly masked by concern. Are you sure? My world is dangerous, Olivia. What happened today is just a taste of what could come. I'm aware of the risks, are you? His grip tightened slightly. You could be kidnapped, hurt, used to control me. And I might not always be able to protect you, no matter how much I want to. I know. Then why stay? There was genuine bewilderment in his voice, as if he couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose such a life willingly. I covered his hands with mine. Because I love you. The words, once spoken, hung in the air between us. Alessandro went perfectly still, his eyes widening fractionally. The only indication of his shock. You shouldn't, he said finally, his voice rough. Probably not, I agreed. But here we are. For a long moment, he simply stared at me, as if trying to memorize my features, or perhaps searching for signs of deception. Then, with a sound somewhere between a groan and a sigh, he pulled me against him, his embrace fierce and protective. I don't deserve this, he murmured into my hair. I don't deserve you. Love isn't about deserving, I replied, my arms tightening around him. It just is. We stayed like that, holding each other in the quiet of the safe house, the world outside temporarily held at bay. Eventually, Alessandro pulled back, his expression solemn. If you're going to be part of my life, truly part of it, there are things you need to know. Precautions you'll have to take, rules that cannot be broken. I nodded. Tell me. And so he did, laying out the realities of life as the partner of a man in his position. I would always have security with me. I would learn defensive driving and how to use a gun. I would memorize safe routes and code words and emergency protocols. My movements would be restricted during times of heightened tension. I would never discuss his business with anyone, not even in seemingly innocent contexts. It sounded oppressive, suffocating. Yet as he spoke, I realized these constraints came not from a desire to control, but from genuine fear for my safety. Alessandro, who calculated risk as naturally as breathing, saw me as something precious enough to protect at all costs. Can you live with these limitations? He asked when he'd finished, watching me with wary eyes. Can you live with having someone to worry about? I countered. Someone who might be used against you? A weakness, as you called it? A shadow crossed his face. You're not just a weakness, Olivia. you're also my strength. These past weeks, having you near, seeing the way you look at me, like I could be better than I am, it's changed something in me. What has it changed? He hesitated, clearly struggling to articulate something he'd never expected to feel. It's given me something beyond power to fight for, something beyond survival to live for. The simple admission touched me more deeply than any grand declaration could have. This was Alessandro stripped of pretense, offering not poetry, but raw truth. Then yes, I said, reaching for his hand. I can live with the limitations. Relief softened his features. There's one more thing we need to discuss. What's that? Your status. He led me to the couch, sitting beside me with our hands still linked. Right now, you're officially my medical consultant. It provides some protection, but not enough. Not anymore. I raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? A promotion? A smile flickered across his face. In a manner of speaking. Understanding dawned slowly. Alessandro, are you proposing? Not exactly. Not yet. His thumb traced patterns on my palm. What I'm suggesting is a marriage of convenience. On paper, you would be my wife. It would give you maximum protection under the old codes that still govern families like ours. No one would dare touch the wife of Alessandro Ricci. I stared at him, trying to process this unexpected turn. A paper marriage. He nodded. For your safety. Nothing would have to change between us otherwise. Just to be clear, I said carefully, you're asking me to marry you, not because you want me as your wife, but because it's strategically advantageous for my protection. Alessandro's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm asking because I can't bear the thought of anything happening to you. Because the idea of you being hurt because of me keeps me awake at night. Because He broke off, frustration evident in the tension of his jaw. Because you what? Because I love you, he said finally, the words awkward on his tongue, as if speaking a language he'd learned but never practiced. But I won't pretend my world isn't what it is. I won't romanticize what I'm offering you. The stark honesty of his response moved me more than any flowery declaration could have. This was Alessandro, ruthlessly pragmatic even in matters of the heart, yet vulnerable in ways he'd never allowed himself to be before. So we would be married in name only? I pressed, needing to understand exactly what he was proposing. At first, perhaps, his eyes held mine. But Olivia, make no mistake, I want you in every way, as my partner, my confidant, my lover. The legalities are just a framework to keep you safe while we figure out the rest. It wasn't a traditional proposal by any measure. There was no bended knee, no diamond ring, no promises of eternal happiness. Instead, Alessandro offered what he could: protection, honesty, and a love so new and fragile he barely knew how to express it. Okay, I said finally. He blinked, clearly surprised by my easy acceptance. Okay? I'll marry you, Alessandro, for protection, for strategy, and for love. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, wonder, and beneath it all, a fierce joy he couldn't quite suppress. His hand tightened around mine. You understand what you're agreeing to? The dangers, the restrictions, the complications? I understand that life offers no guarantees, regardless of who we love. I moved closer, my free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Alessandro turned his face into my palm, pressing a kiss against it with unexpected tenderness. When he looked up, the vulnerability in his eyes took my breath away. I will protect you with everything I have, he vowed, the words carrying the weight of an oath. Not just your life, but your happiness, your freedom. I know what I'm asking of you, Olivia. I will spend every day making it worth the sacrifice. 24 hours later, I stood in a judge's private chamber, exchanging vows with Alessandro, in a ceremony attended only by Dominic and Dr. Russo as witnesses. The judge, clearly familiar with the Ricci family, asked no questions about our hasty wedding, simply processed the paperwork with efficient discretion. The ring Alessandro placed on my finger was a simple platinum band, unadorned but heavy with significance. He'd apologized for its plainness, explaining that a more elaborate ring would come later, when security concerns allowed for a proper jeweler's visit. I found I preferred it this way, honest and unembellished, like the bond forming between us. As we signed the marriage certificate, I caught a glimpse of my new name written in the flowing script of the document, Olivia Ricci. It looked foreign, almost fictional, yet it was now legally, irrevocably mine. How does it feel to be a married woman? Alessandro asked as we left the courthouse, his hand resting protectively at the small of my back. Surreal, I admitted. And you? How does it feel to have a wife, even if only on paper? Something flashed in his eyes, possession, pride, and something deeper I wasn't sure he was ready to name. You are not just my wife on paper, Olivia, he said quietly. Never think that. The words echoed between us as we slid into the waiting car, Dominic closing the door behind us before taking his place in the front passenger seat. As we pulled away from the curb, Alessandro's hand found mine, fingers intertwining with casual intimacy that belied the significance of the gesture. Where to, boss? Dominic asked, meeting Alessandro's eyes in the rearview mirror. Alessandro looked at me, a question in his gaze. Home, I said simply. His smile, rare and genuine, transformed his face. Home, he agreed, squeezing my hand. And as we drove through the Chicago streets toward an uncertain future, I realized home was no longer a place for me. It was this man beside me, with all his darkness and complexity, all his strength and unexpected tenderness. For better or worse, in danger and in safety, Alessandro Ricci was my home now.